another Chupacabra sighting.
Hey, it's Nick from Chupacabra Offroad, and I'm here to answer one question today. Is spending $800 on a new spring kit for your side-by-side the best money you can spend? Yes, it is, and here's the proof.
So here's my 2018 Polaris RZR Turbo 4 Walker Evans Edition that I picked up earlier this year, and the first thing I did was take it out onto my local riding areas here in Arizona and put a few hundred miles on it, as well as taking it to Glamis and then also to Mexico with the stock springs, just to kind of get an idea of what this vehicle feels like. And then we put the spring kit on and take it to a few other environments and then see how it compares. So a little background on me: this is the 6th RZR that I've owned. I started off in 2014 with a RZR 4 1000. In 2015, I also had a RZR 4 1000. Of course, both of those had the Walker Evans needle shock stock. Then in 2016, I had a RZR Turbo 2-seater and 4-seater with the Fox internal bypass shocks. And then in 2017, I had another RZR 4 Turbo with the internal bypass, but they were the upgraded internal bypass with the true dual rate coils and high and low speed compression adjustment. So I've got a lot of experience with the RZR chassis. I'd say close to 9,000 to 10,000 miles. And also was lucky enough to go test with Fox in Barstow. So had an amazing experience for a day, just going to check out what it's like to ride with someone at Fox who really knows exactly what they're talking about and how to set up my vehicle with ride height, crossover rings. Actually revalved my front shocks to have a little bit quicker rebound. But learned a lot, learned what to look for and how to think about how I'm setting my vehicle up in order to get the best ride. So that's kind of my basis. And then after getting a little bit of miles on this vehicle, I kind of realized that, you know, based on my past experience, this thing was a little stiff. Polaris went the other way compared to the original RZR 1000 I had, in terms of the 14 and 15 were really soft. And then model year 18 bumper forward, of course, it's stiffer and hardly bottoms out. Very harsh on the little stuff, but I guess that's to be expected. It's good that Polaris went stiffer. Of course, you got a turbo that's, you know, over 100 pounds heavier than the non-turbo. And then you also have to realize it's got 58 horsepower more. So it makes sense they would stiffen it up. The vehicle's driven a lot more aggressively. And of course, times have evolved so quickly in the side-by-side market that, you know, everyone's going to need some stiffer settings just to prevent the car from bottoming harshly. So that was my initial impression. And then I went over to Glamis to go do some hardcore duning with some very fast duners. Mainly everyone's in a V8 sand car. And that was another good tell. I couldn't believe that when I duned all weekend, I think I only bottomed out the vehicle twice. So even going pretty high speeds, and here's some good footage. You can see the miles per hour that I'm going. These are in the big bowls up behind Osborne, and just having a good time and getting used to the vehicle and seeing what it does.
Soft setting, still haven't bottomed. A little stiffer and harsher. I appreciate the stiffness for the higher speed. Definitely sways a little less, but again, you're just losing that comfort in that small bump compliance, excuse me. You know, with suspension, you always want to try to have your cake and eat it too. Firm and steady when you're going fast, but soft and supple over the stutter, bumps, chatter, slow speed, ruts. I like to be using a little bit more of the rear stroke. It feels like it's not bottoming, but I'm not using all the travel. It ramps up quite a bit. Mid-stroke feels more harsh and it just kicks more. Where I think with the shock therapy spring setup, I'm assuming it would better flush mid-stroke feel, of course, but then it's still gonna have some bottoming resistance, particularly when you start playing around with the crossover ring height adjustment and getting it set up.
Here's what they look like after about 500 miles on them. The upper tender springs are completely collapsed, so we're basically riding on the stiffer main spring, and again, we're losing a lot of that small bump compliance on the chatter. So here's what you get from Shock Therapy when you order the spring kit. You're getting 8 new springs, completely replace all stock springs, and you're also getting a crossover ring for each shock. They make it very easy. They label each shock rear lower, rear upper, front lower. It's pretty intuitive just by looking at them. Of course, you got a bigger diameter on the rear because it's a bigger shock diameter. It's 2.5 versus the 2.0 in the front. Same thing with the crossover ring. So pretty straightforward. We're gonna go ahead and jack the car up right now and throw these springs on. So here's my first ride with the new spring kit installed. These are the coral pink sand dunes in southern Utah. I really wanted to try the new springs in a sand dune environment because that's when I tend to bottom out the RZR easiest. And as you can see here, following my buddy in his RZR, the dunes have a lot of G-outs and little rises where you're catching a little bit of air. There's also some tight twisty trails, so it ends up being a really good place to kind of tune with the suspension and see how it feels. When I installed them using Shock Therapy's measurements for the preload ring height, I was pretty high, but they didn't have the specific instructions for the RZR Walker Turbo, so I used the Walker non-turbo. I experienced a lot of topping out for that reason, and initially I thought the springs were too stiff for the valving, but after lowering the vehicle about 3 times, I got to a setting that was working really well. It was plush, it felt like I was using all the travel, and then when I added 3 passengers, then it started to bottom out. Had to stiffen up the compression clicker, several settings, as well as lower the crossover rings. So same type of experience I've had with Fox, other shocks in the dunes. I think it's important to use their instructions as a guideline, but make sure you really pay attention to the ride height. I ended up being about an inch higher than recommended ride height, but felt like it didn't bottom as much and it still handled really well. You know, that turbo's got the front sway bar, so I think that helps quite a bit compared to the old non-turbo. And then their recommended height settings are also very close to Fox's, which is roughly 14 inches in the front, and also making sure that your front end is about 1/2 of an inch higher than the rear. I'm back home, and home for me here is Peoria, Arizona. Got my dirt tires on. I'm running the 32-inch BFGs. As it sits right now, I'm back to about 16.5 in the front, 16 in the rear with me out of the car, and again, you're going to drop about 1/2 of an inch once I jump in. I'm here in Geyser Loop. Pretty rough technical terrain. I'm excited to go see how the car feels. Again, my compression settings are all the way soft. My crossover rings are pretty close to what Shock Therapy suggests. I'm a little higher in the rear. I'm about 7 3/4 versus 8. Again, because I want to feel if the car will bottom with just me in it. A lot of times when I'm on the hard pack, I like to set the car up for 2 people, no weight in the back, and I very rarely bottom in a 4-passenger. Won't be surprised if I don't bottom the rear, but I want to get that balance front to rear to where I'm not bottoming the front either. From the older cars I had owned, the little 2.0 walkers, the model year 14, model year 15 XP1000s, the front tended to blow through the stroke, but this car is quite a bit different. It's revalved and it's a lot stiffer than those old shocks. So a walker isn't a walker in terms of when you're talking about one walker having shock car versus another. Polaris is always making upgraded improvements. They're always changing things. They might even change spring rates without telling anybody. So, you know, the cars are always changing in an effort to get better.
right, so I just got back running the geyser loop for the first time. I know why everyone tests out here. Very rough, really rocky. Reminded me of the last time I was out in Prim or out in the Parker right after the race. So a lot of sharp rocks, big holes, big grooves, like big trophy truck style grooves. I'm really glad I had the tall tires, didn't drag the belly. Pretty happy so far, extremely happy with the shock setup. Felt really plush. I'm gonna go ahead and pull out the measuring tape real quick and see where we're at. So this is me outside of the car. I'm right at about 16 inches in the front. Looking at the rear, I am pretty close to 16 as well. I usually go off of the skid plate, but I'm gonna kind of cruise around the area and find some faster trails that aren't as rough, kind of similar to what I would normally ride. I'm gonna drop the back here a little bit and see if that helps. Just looking at the rear radius rods, you can tell they're at a pretty steep angle. You definitely don't want them flat, but you can tell it's a little on the high side. So what I think I'm gonna do is I'm gonna rotate the top shock collar here counterclockwise. I'll go 3 revolutions and see what that does to go out here and again. Morning from Moab. Do a little bit of tuning to the car before we get going. Checked the measurement on this thing just this morning and it was 15 inches in the back, 16 in the front, so a little bit low. Raised the back of the car about 1/2 inch. And then I adjusted the crossover rings up a little bit. You can see I'm up to about 7 1/4 here, where Shock Therapy recommends 8. All right, so real quick, I just decided to lift up the crossover rings, just basically because I have not bottomed out even going fast in the desert. So now that I'm gonna be kind of cruising slower on the rocks and I haven't bottomed, of course, compression's fully in the soft setting all the way around. You can kind of see how much I moved it up. I'm right at about 5 inches at the very bottom, which is higher than Shock Therapy suggests, but it did such a good job with the spring rates. I think might as well try it, right? Get a little more articulation, hopefully. Softer, compliant ride for a type of terrain we're gonna be riding here in Moab. So gonna check it out, right? You don't know what the best setting is until you explore. It's always good to check these things too. These little Allen keys, this takes a smaller wrench than the rears do, but try it out. Like I said, about 16 in the front, should be about 15.5 in the rear with me out of the car for the ride height. Gonna drop some air pressure a little bit, raise the crossover rings, keep it in the fully soft setting, and should be pretty awesome.
So just got back from Moab and really liked how the car was set up. Again, I'm a little bit higher than probably what Shock Therapy recommends, but that's what I wanted for the rocks. Handled great, had the compression completely soft. Couldn't have been happier, I think, as a whole. Car sways a little bit more, which is to be expected now that I'm running with a lot plusher setting than what I had stock. But very happy with how it worked out there in Moab. I like the crossover rings being a little bit higher out there as well. I left it for the desert. I like it. You know, I still haven't bottomed. I think I'm gonna play with it a little bit more. All right, guys, so hands down, $800 is the best money I've spent on this thing to make it handle better. When you add the high performance spring kit with some bigger, high quality 32-inch tires like these BFGs, you've got a lot of clearance and performance, traction in a lot of different situations. So couldn't be happier. Thank you guys again for watching. If you like the content, go ahead and like and subscribe, and we've got more coming your way.
I don't know how we ever film with these old GoPros without the screen on the back. It's such a pain compared to the new ones.
Another Chupacabra sighting.
I've never run across anything like this.
Do you believe in the